Hey guys, it's Abdul for the good folks over at Leon Tailoring, 809 North Delaware in downtown Indianapolis. Get over to Leon Tailoring for that young person who graduated. Congratulations, by the way. And make sure they've got the clothes for that big job interview. Hey, the economy may be good, but you still got to dress for success. And Leon Tailoring, they can help your young person do that with the professional wardrobe and attire that they need. And so all those years of college and getting a degree do not go to waste. So Leon Tailoring, the perfect place to get your young professional off to that start in the world of work. Leon Tailoring, 809 North Delaware and downtown Indianapolis.
1. Well, back in April of 2022, former Indiana State Senator Brent Waltz was convicted of violating federal campaign finance laws, making and receiving conduit contributions, and making false statements to the FBI. So in addition to the 10 months he was sentenced in prison, he was also fined $40,000 and some change and 2 years court probation. Well, now I want to say Waltz has completed that sentence. He's got a new book basically saying it was a witch hunt, and he was set up and being punished for not cooperating with the federal government's investigation of Centaur Gaming's John Keeler at the time. And joining us now in studio to talk about that is Brent Waltz and his new book. So, Brent, my friend, always good to talk to you. How you been? I know it sounds like a weird question, but...
No, you'll be happy to know that I'm in great spirits. It's been a lot of fun, talking about this book and finally being able to share my side of the story. One of my frustrations, and you know how I love to talk, of course, recovering politician that I am. It was one of my greatest life's frustrations when you're being investigated, when you're having a witch hunt. Your natural inclination is to jump on a tree stump and shout as loud as you can what's happening. And your attorney says you can't talk. You can't talk to the public. You can't talk to the media. Can't talk to family members, friends, business associates, nobody. And then, of course, when you're spending 176 days in captivity, it becomes very difficult to get your story out. So I started writing about my experience literally my first day at Ashland Minimum Security Camp, and that was the germination of my book, POW, Prisoner of Washington.
Now let's talk about the book titled POW, Prisoner of Washington, because a lot of folks would say that you didn't commit your crimes in Washington, you committed your crimes here in Indiana, so how does Washington sort of fit into all this? And turn your microphone a little bit more closer towards you.
Okay, how's this?
Much better, yeah.
Okay, perfect. And so in this case, I ran for Congress in 2016. I had served in the Indiana State Senate for 12 years, 16 years in elected office. And I lost my primary in 2016 when I was running for Congress. And so I was accused of violating campaign finance laws. More importantly, for the purpose of the investigation, I was singled out along with John Keeler. Because the government, or at least some parts of the government in the Department of Injustice, was targeting Rod Radcliffe, a gaming executive who I have known for 25, almost 30 years, and who John Keeler was the general counsel of his gaming company, Centaur. They first approached, well, nothing had happened. I lose the election. I was going to retire from politics, my Senate term expiring towards the end of 2016. And I get a phone call from the FBI, and this is right after Rod Radcliffe had been publicly announced as Donald Trump's campaign finance chairman. So the FBI calls me and presumably contacted a number of other people that knew Rod, had been friends with Rod over the years. And they weren't interested in anything that I did. They were very interested in, tell me about Rod Radcliffe. Tell me about his business dealings. Who are his friends? What's he done? Do you know anything illegal that he's done? They were on a fishing expedition. At that point, largely about Rod's interest in trying to legalize marijuana. Well, I oppose the legalization of marijuana. Always have. I still do. I know a lot.
I'll forgive you for that one.
I know. Abdul, I know we disagree on this, but I have been nothing but consistent in that view, and I was certainly felt that way in 2016. I laughed at the FBI because they were trying to be accusatory of me in some way. I said, well, if you look at the voting record of me, I think you'll find that I have opposed the legalization of marijuana, including the legislation that Rod was supporting at that time, every single time. And I voted against that, friendship or otherwise. And, to be fair, Rod did not support me when I ran for Congress in 2016. He had helped support Attorney General Greg Zeller, who apparently was perhaps a little bit more open-minded on the marijuana issue than I was. And so that's how things started. I'm convinced that had Rod not been Donald Trump's campaign finance chairman, my 176 days that I spent at Ashland probably would have been spent, hanging out on the beach or, walking around Greenwood Park Mall, doing something other than being in federal prison. I believe that in my heart of hearts.
We're talking to former State Senator Brent Waltz, the author of the book POW, Prisoner of Washington. Waltz served several months in jail in Ashland Correctional Center in Kentucky for his role in campaign contributions and dealing with New Centaur Gaming's Rod Radcliffe and John Keeler, who was a lobbyist. So they asked you for information about Rod Radcliffe. You did say you didn't have anything or wouldn't cooperate. So how did they end up going after you then?
So fast forward 2 years. Again, nothing from the government any way, shape, or form. I get a knock on my door. This was in, I think, late July 2018. My girlfriend at the time we'd been having some issues, and she was going to come over around 10 o'clock and decide whether or not we were going to, break up or not. So I was expecting her. So I wake up around 8:30, have breakfast, jump in the shower, expecting her. My phone rings. So I'm assuming it's her telling me that, she's going to be running a few minutes late, something like that. It's my former campaign treasurer, Mark Collins, who I've known for 25 years at that point. And he says, Brent, the FBI just left my house. What? You could have told me that aliens had landed on the White House lawn, and I would not have been any more surprised. And I said, why? And he says, well, they were asking questions about Kelly Rogers. Kelly Rogers was a political consultant out of Washington, D.C. that had helped early on in my campaign for Congress. And I think they're coming to see you. And I knew how much time it took, to go from Mark's house to my house, about 15 minutes. So they'd be arriving right around the time that my girlfriend would be arriving. And so the doorbell rings, and I have no idea if it's going to be my girlfriend or federal agents. And so open the door. It's my girlfriend, and she's, of course, pretty emotional, not knowing if we're going to break up or not. And I said, dear, I'd love to have this conversation with you, but in a few minutes, FBI agents are going to pull into that driveway and come in here. I have no idea, what they want. I have no idea what's going to happen. But I'm really not in the place right now mentally to be able to have the conversation that you need us to have. And to her credit, she immediately snapped into kind of crisis mode and says, well, what do you need? And I said, well, I think need a witness at this point, so if you wouldn't mind taking notes and just kind of, be present, I'd certainly appreciate it. So 5 minutes later, the FBI comes up. They start asking me questions about Kelly Rogers. Now, Kelly Rogers had been a political consultant. He had known Rod for several years. I had known him for probably 10 years by that point, maybe a little longer than that. Had helped me a little bit with my, I guess it would have been my second or third Senate re-election campaigns. But he's largely from Washington, D.C. Staunch Republican, staunch conservative, knew Donald Trump and knew a lot of people who knew Donald Trump very well. Well, Rod and Centaur had retained him to do political consulting on behalf of Trump and trying to make those types of connections. And so Kelly had raised some money for me. The government alleged that money had been taken either from Centaur or from other sources and had been bundled and then sent to me. To Kelly's credit, as he was being interviewed by the FBI 3 times, I might add, under oath, he said, no, Brent Waltz did not know anything about what I was doing. Yes, I did it. I'm guilty. I didn't tell Brent. I don't think Brent knew about it, and I went out of my way to hide what I was doing from Brent. Of course, that information never made it to the grand jury by the prosecution. They left that part out for some reason.
Our guest on the program today is former Indiana State Senator Brent Waltz, who was sentenced back in April of 2022 for 2 felonies, receiving conduit contributions and lying to the FBI. And Brent's written about his story in a book called POW, Prisoner of Washington, a conservative's journey through the justice system. So let's talk about your time. So we go to trial. I remember we had our conversation. That day had the sentence.
45 minutes after my sentencing, I was being interviewed by you. Absolutely.
So, from the time you served, what was it like? Your time in bars in Ashland?
Well, the closest thing I can probably the closest thing I can compare it to would be the TV show Hogan's Heroes. In fact, a chapter in my book, POW, Prisoner of Washington, is entitled Hogan's Heroes. But instead of
so you're Sergeant Schultz, I know nothing. Or...
you'd be surprised how similar some of the guards were, And so they like to be called corrections officers. I always call them guards because they were guarding people. They weren't correcting anything, and they certainly weren't behaving as officers for the most part. And so instead of German accents, you'd have Southern accents. And I'd say the guards at Stalag 13 were about as incompetent as the guards that I saw at Ashland. Rampant smuggling of anything that you ever wanted. Drugs were routinely smuggled into the camp. Buffalo Wild Wings smuggled into the camp. Cigarettes, alcohol, cell phones. There were about 150 people at the camp, and just to add a little bit of local color to this, it's not really a prison. It's more like a college dormitory. There's not bars. You're not in a cell per se. And about a third of the people would leave every day the camp and have jobs outside of the facility. After a fashion, I guess. Yeah. Greenhouse. They would mow the warden's lawn. They would have maintenance. They'd do whatever. They'd put on a little reflective vest and come in and out, most of the time not being searched. So things would go in and out that way, and a lot of other different ways. And so that was kind of my experience. There was also, I didn't see this firsthand, but I heard this from a physician who'd been there for a few years. About a year and a half before I arrived, 2 prostitutes were smuggled into the camp. And they stayed a fair amount of time. And apparently a significant percentage of the camp had some sort of infection as a result of that. And and so, if you can smuggle prostitutes into the camp, if you can smuggle drugs, like I said, it's Stalag 13 is much, much more than probably Attica or a Supermax or something like that in terms of an analogy.
So what did you do while you were there?
Well, I wrote the book. You check yourself in, right? And so one of the first questions that I'm asked was, do you have a COVID vaccine? I had not taken a COVID vaccine, and I told the guard, no, I've not. I don't have the shot. And they said, well, you're going to have to go into quarantine then. Well, okay. Quarantine consisted of a 6-foot by 8-foot jail cell. Now that is, what you would imagine, prison to be like. And I stayed there for my first 10 days at the camp. You're supposed to stay 5 days, but because that 5th day was on the weekend, and then one of the guards wanted to wait until there were some more people at the camp before they go through orientation, they kept me there locked in a 6 by 8-foot cage for another 3 days. Was not released out for exercise. I mean, you're solitary confinement. I asked for books. The guard would say, "Oh yeah, I'll get you the library rack." They had like a little push cart with books that they would allegedly bring by, but only when you wouldn't ask. If you ask, of course, you'd never see it. So for the 2nd or 3rd day, I asked again and again, and the guards, "Oh yeah, I'm sorry, I forgot. I'll get that to you," and of course, never did. So, just blatant unconstitutional treatment of people. I know one guy that was there for 58 days. He lost 29 pounds, was not given medication. He had diabetes and a number of other high blood pressure, and was not given anything of the sort, to help cure that. They said, well, you're in the SHU. It was called Special Housing Unit. You're not permitted to have this type of medication, and he never received it.
Our guest on the program today, former State Senator Brent Waltz, author of a new book, POW, Prisoner of Washington, writing about his time in the federal criminal justice system for his role with respect to Centaur Gaming, Rod Radcliffe, John Keeler, all that stuff you can read about at indypolitics.org. Once you decided to write the book, I suppose my question is, how did you put it all together? Did you start from day one? Or did you just go through? Was it in chronological order, or more like an anthological order?
There's 3 parts to the book. The first part talks about my experience with the criminal justice system. So it discusses all the tricks that the government uses, and not just for me, but for other people that they're trying to politically assassinate or take down or intimidate or scare. And it's a very predictable thing. You saw this with Peter Navarro, with Roger Stone, with Paul Manafort, with General Michael Flynn. You're seeing this with Donald Trump. The list goes on and on and on. It starts by them leaking information to the media. And then there'll be some articles about this. Now, of course, you shouldn't taint the jury pool. And in fact, if as a defendant you say something, they would get up and be terribly offended that you're trying to to change public opinion, but they would consistently leak to the media information. When you're under investigation, the first thing your lawyer tells you is don't talk to anybody. So they are the only ones holding the microphone. So then you get indicted, and so they attempt to try to take your reputation from you. And a lot of people, legal fights are expensive. Attorneys are expensive. I'm fortunate to be in a position to be able to, have funded my defense, but a lot of people couldn't. And so they'd lose their homes. They'd lose their jobs. I've been in private equity for 25, almost 30 years. And so I was probably, a little bit of an outlier on this regard. But so many people, in the political process, when they're attacked, their wives leave them. I'm not married. No small children that will say, why is Daddy not with us for Christmas? That kind of thing. And so they try to attack your wealth. They try to attack your resources. And then eventually, at least with 98.6% of the time, they take your freedom. And they hope that after having gone through all of that experience that you just kind of shrink in a corner and hide. That's really not my nature, to do that. And so the book, was my first response to be able to set the record straight and let people actually know what government does in these types of cases, in these situations, and what happened to me personally.
Now, you said that was part one, but what about part two and part three?
Part two chronicled my time at Ashland, and that's the bulk of the book. There's a lot of anecdotes, some absolutely tragic, others just really, really, really funny. There was a case where blatant racism, this isn't the funny part, but on Martin Luther King Jr. Day, white guards would go to African-American inmates and say, Happy James Earl Ray Day. I mean, insane. And not just one guard on one time. This happened multiple times throughout that day. There was an African-American gentleman was arrested and says he was guilty. Fentanyl. Was a fentanyl dealer. He was arrested when he was 18. He says, I should absolutely be in jail. I was facing a life sentence based on the fentanyl rules for sentencing. He had 45 minutes with a lawyer before pleading to 14 years in federal prison. So he freely admits that he did it. He said, I did it. It was wrong. I would never do this again. But 45 minutes with a lawyer when I had hundreds of hours with my lawyer for something that certainly was not a life sentence type situation, regardless of how it was going to go, is an indictment of our criminal justice system. He should have had much better legal counsel than that.
Our guest on the program today, former State Senator Brent Waltz, talking about his time served in the Ashland Correctional Facility for his role with the whole Centaur Gaming, Rod Radcliffe, John Keeler. Like I said, the story you can read up at indypolitics.org. Obviously, when you're in prison, you're working on your book, but obviously you can't work on your book 24 hours a day. So what did you do also to sort of kill time?
I did a lot of reading. I had never read a novel by Ernest Hemingway. And so I had this kind of bucket list of things that I always want to do in terms of reading. And the prison, to their credit, has a tremendous library, probably 4,000, 5,000 volumes. A lot of it true crime, as you would imagine, but a lot of the classics. So the first book I read was The Count of Monte Cristo, which covers, of course, a prisoner wrongly sentenced, and what he did after he got out, after he had his jailbreak. Along those lines. And so I found that very inspirational. And then read the complete works of Ernest Hemingway, Farewell to Arms, For Whom the Bell Tolls. Really enjoyed
Old Man in the Sea.
Old Man in the Sea.
Remember that in high school.
Exactly. And so I had never read a book of Hemingway. I'm 50 years old and had never done that. And so now I read all of it. So I did not have a particularly unpleasant time there. Obviously, it was horrible not to be with your family and friends. I missed a Christmas. I missed a Thanksgiving, with my family, and that was unfortunate. But again, I think the people who were hoping that, I was going to get shanked in the prison lunch line or something, I think they would be very disappointed with the experience. On my 80th day, the camp proclaimed me the camp shot caller.
I was going to ask you about that.
Yes, go ahead.
So what exactly is a shot caller?
A shot caller,
which you mentioned in the book, by the way.
I do indeed, and I chronicle how this happened. A shot caller, most prisons, probably every prison, has a shot caller. With Hogan's Heroes, just as the lunatics don't run the asylum, the guard or do run the asylum, the guards don't really run the camp. The prisoners run the camp. And so, human beings find a way of organizing themselves, whether it's a village, in South America or Africa, or Parliament in England. And so prisons do the same thing. And so a shot caller is an individual that's deemed to mediate disputes. When two people someone stole someone's batteries out of their Walkman, or something like that. Someone owes somebody some Mountain Dew, or some petty dispute like that, or there's a fight that's going to happen. You try to diffuse the situation before something becomes more serious. The gentleman who was the shot caller before was an heir to a coal mining fortune worth about $30 million, and former mixed martial artist, mid-50s, and he was being transferred to a facility in Florida for his last remaining months incarcerated. And so he calls me into his room, and he says, "Hey, Brent, as you know, I'm going to be leaving in a couple of weeks here. I was thinking you might replace me as shot caller." And I laughed at him. I said, I kind of looked at myself, and I said, I weigh about 150 pounds. And it's like, I'm not really sure I'm qualified to do that. He says, "Well, I think you're perfect for it. People respect you. You get along well with, the African Americans, the blacks, the Latinos. They'll listen to you. And I think you'd be perfect for it." I said, "Well, I'm not really in a position to mediate anything. I can't really enforce anything." And so he calls, three guys over, and I'd say collectively the three men weighed about 1,000 pounds total. And they said, "Hey guys, you know Brent, right? Oh yeah, you like him, right? Oh yeah, he's a good guy. If he ever needed you to do something, would you listen to him? Would you follow him? Oh yeah, oh sure, yeah, whatever you need, Brent. Yeah, we got you." Never had any problems from that. Never had any problems at all, but certainly from that point forward. So that was my experience as a shot caller for the last 100 days or so of my captivity.
Not you're out. Back, let's say you served your time, probation. I believe you completed your probation.
Not yet.
Not yet.
I'm still under probation.
Still under probation. I guess my question is, how do you function on the outside now? Because we hear a lot about ex-offenders having trouble getting jobs, losing professional licenses. You said you're in the private equity. Can you still do that? Or?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and in fact, the irony is that I'd say this, and Abdul, you've known me for 20 years. And when I was in my late 20s, early 30s, just starting in politics, I was very focused, very hardworking, and whether you agreed with my politics always or not, I think most people would say that I had a pretty good work ethic. And so after leaving politics, in 2016, I got a little lazy. I wasn't that active in politics, public events. Professionally, I was at a point financially where I really didn't need to work. Businesses were going very well, and so I kind of took my eye off the ball. I don't know if it was a midlife crisis or what, but I got lazy. And so I have a ginormous chip on my shoulder now. And so if the government was hoping to have me kind of slink into a corner and hide or whatever, I think they'd be terribly mistaken. Over the last year, since actually about a year and a half since I was released, I've done more private equity work, I've made more investments, and I've been more focused on my profession than I have certainly in the past decade, maybe the last 20 years. Now we'll see how those businesses do. So, let's have this conversation in a year or two from now, and we'll see how those go. But I am absolutely committed professionally, and I have been very pleasantly surprised by how I've been treated after my release. It helps knowing that the Republican nominee for president has 32 more felony convictions than I do. But it's also a sad commentary on where we are as a country right now.
I was going to ask you about that because you mentioned some of the Donald Trump cast of characters: Peter Navarro,
Paul Manafort, General Michael Flynn. The list goes on. And Roger Stone. The list goes on and on and on.
All these folks indicted, and the thing is, I had to find a jury of 12 people who didn't know each other, who probably couldn't figure out what to get on pizza together to come back and say beyond a reasonable doubt that Donald Trump was guilty, that Peter Navarro was guilty, all these folks were guilty. Is there really a conspiracy out there?
Yes, I truly believe that. And I can speak not just from watching the news, but I can speak from personal experience. I truly believe that had Rod Ratcliffe not been Donald Trump's campaign finance chairman, none of this would have happened. Because their sole interest in the initial discussions that I had was all about Rod. It was my understanding from John Keeler's legal counsel that they told him, "Hey, if you give up Rod, we're going to let you go." And he told him to go pound sand. and they eventually got him on a tax charge. That had it was a $14,000 tax charge related to Centaur because he signed this professional service agreement. It was for like $80-some thousand. The government alleged that that was a campaign contribution. They alleged that it was a taxable event, whereas you could write off a professional service agreement. You can't write off political contributions. And because of that, there was a $14,000 tax liability. That is what John Keeler spent 6 weeks in federal prison doing. That was it. And this is dealing with a company that year had $720 million in revenue. So he goes to federal prison, convicted felon, for a $14,000 tax dispute. That's what we're dealing with. And there are a lot of people in this world that underpaid a heck of a lot more than $14,000. That they paid a fine, they paid back the money or whatever. There's probably hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people in this country that owe more than that to the IRS. They're not going to federal prison. They're not going to be convicted felons. The common denominator there is that the government thought that John Keeler knew something about Rod. They wanted to apply pressure on him, and when he refused to do so, within 24 hours after that is when they contacted my lawyer. Not before that. My lawyer had contacted the Justice Department, introduced himself, said, if you have any questions, let us know. It was only after that they contacted me. And then, not about my campaign finance stuff. It was, we think Brent knows something about Rod. My attorney would say, well, what do you think Brent knows? Maybe he'll help you with that. What do you think he knows? They never said, because they didn't know. They were on a pure fishing expedition. Simple as that.
So what's next for you?
Private equity, buy low, sell high, venture capital. I've got a number of exciting companies that I've been working on over the last couple years, or actually year and a half, I should say, and we'll see how they go. So stay tuned.
Any thought about ever getting back into politics?
Well, as a convicted felon, I am prohibited from holding elected office, and I had made the decision either way when I gave up my Senate seat to run for Congress that 16 years was enough for me. So it would require a presidential pardon in order for me to be able to legally hold elected office. But even if that came, I certainly have no interest in holding elected office either way. I do have an interest, however, in criminal justice reform. I always have. I hope I always will, and this experience has made me more focused on that. That's part of what the book is about as well.
All right, well, our guest in the program today has been former State Senator Brent Waltz. He wrote the book POW, Prisoner of Washington, Conservatives' Journey through Our Criminal Justice System. Brent, my friend, always good to talk to you. Thank you very much for being with us today.
Abdul, thanks for having me.